The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before Margaret Chen, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor with mechanical precision. She clutched her leather briefcase tighter, checking her watch for the third time in as many minutes. The board meeting started in 4 to 5 minutes, and she still had to review the quarterly projections. Ms. Chen. A nurse appeared beside her, clipboard in hand. Your daughter is ready to be discharged. We just need you to sign. Can't my assistant handle this? Margaret interrupted, already scrolling through emails on her phone. I have an urgent presentation. The nurse's expression hardened. Your 3-year-old daughter just had her tonsils removed. She's asking for you. Margaret glanced toward the recovery room where little Sophie waited, her small frame nearly swallowed by the hospital bed. For a moment, something flickered in Margaret's chest, a pull she'd learned to ignore months ago. But her phone buzzed with another message from her CEO, and the moment passed. I'll send my housekeeper, Margaret said, turning toward the elevator. Tell Sophie I'll bring her something nice. She didn't hear the nurse's disappointed sigh as the elevator doors closed. 3 months later, Margaret stood in her penthouse apartment overlooking San Francisco Bay, surveying the wreckage of her personal life. Divorce papers lay scattered across her glass coffee table. Richard had finally done it, filed for custody, citing her emotional abandonment of their daughter. The words stung more than she'd expected. But what cut deeper was Sophie's testimony, recorded by the family court evaluator. Mommy doesn't want to be with me. She's always working. I make her angry. Margaret poured herself another glass of wine, staring at the city lights below. She'd built a tech empire from nothing, turned a small startup into a billion-dollar corporation. She'd been featured in Forbes, invited to speak at TED, courted by venture capitalists worldwide, but she was losing the only thing she hadn't planned for, her daughter's love. The breaking point came on a rain-soaked Tuesday in November. Margaret had just closed the biggest deal of her career, a merger that would make her company a major player in artificial intelligence. Her team celebrated at an exclusive restaurant, champagne flowing freely. She smiled for the photographs, accepted congratulations, and felt nothing. Her phone rang past midnight. The nanny's panicked voice cut through the champagne haze. Ms. Chen, Sophie has a fever of 104. I've called an ambulance. Margaret arrived at the hospital to find Richard already there, cradling Sophie against his chest. Her daughter's eyes found hers across the room, and for the first time in her life, Margaret saw something that broke her. Indifference. Sophie looked at her mother the way one might look at a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong room. She's stable, Richard said coldly. No thanks to you. The doctor's diagnosis was simple, a severe flu that could have been prevented with more rest and attention to early symptoms. Children need consistency, the doctor said gently. They need someone who notices when they're not themselves. Margaret stood in the hallway afterward, her empire suddenly meaningless. She'd conquered boardrooms and disrupted industries, but she couldn't remember the last time she'd actually looked at her daughter, really looked, not just glanced while checking email. The idea came to her at 3 a.m., sitting in her dark apartment. She couldn't undo the past 3 years. Couldn't erase the ballet recitals she'd missed, the bedtime stories unread, the scraped knees she hadn't kissed. But maybe she could learn to be different. Maybe she could become someone Sophie might forgive. Margaret called her board the next morning. I'm taking a sabbatical. 6 months, minimum. The silence on the line was deafening. You can't be serious, her CFO sputtered. We're in the middle of the merger integration. You're the face of this company, find another face, Margaret said quietly. I'm done. She sold her penthouse, paid off the divorce settlement with barely a glance at the numbers, and did something that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. She bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood in Berkeley, within walking distance of Sophie's school. Richard was skeptical. What's the angle here, Margaret? Another photo op for your image rehabilitation. No angle, she said. Just trying to show up. The first weeks were brutal. Sophie treated her with the wary politeness of a child who'd learned not to expect anything. When Margaret picked her up from school, Sophie's eyes would dart hopefully to Richard's car before settling on her mother with resignation. How was school? Margaret would ask. Fine. What did you learn today? Stuff. Margaret realized she'd never actually had a conversation with her daughter. She'd given instructions, made arrangements, provided material things, but she'd never listened. So she started small. She sat on the floor during playtime, instead of watching from the couch with her laptop. She learned the names of Sophie's stuffed animals, Mr. Whiskers, Princess Butterfly, and Bob the Dragon. She burned dinner trying to make Sophie's favorite pasta, and they laughed together. Actually laughed. As they ordered pizza instead. One night, 6 weeks into their new life, Sophie crawled into Margaret's lap during a movie. Mommy, she whispered. Margaret's breath caught. Yes, sweetheart. Are you staying this time? Or are you going back to work soon? The question pierced straight through Margaret's carefully constructed armor. She wrapped her arms around her daughter, breathing in the scent of Sophie's strawberry shampoo. "I'm staying," Margaret promised. "I'm right here." The crisis came 5 months into Margaret's sabbatical. Her former company, without her steady leadership, had made a catastrophic error in the merger. A data breach exposed millions of users' personal information. The stock price plummeted. Her board called, begging her to return. "They need you," Richard said when she told him. To his credit, there was no judgment in his voice. "That's thousands of jobs at stake. People's livelihoods." Margaret looked at Sophie, who was carefully coloring at the kitchen table, her tongue poking out in concentration. "They need me," Margaret agreed. "But she needs me more." She spent the next 3 weeks on the phone, consulting remotely, helping her team navigate the crisis without returning to the office. It was exhausting, balancing conference calls with school pickups, strategy sessions with bedtime stories. But every time she felt the old pull, the addictive rush of being indispensable, the siren call of professional validation, she would look at Sophie and remember that numb feeling in the hospital corridor. Success meant nothing if she had no one to share it with. The real moment of reckoning came on Sophie's 6th birthday. Margaret had planned a small party in their backyard, nothing extravagant, just a few friends from school, a homemade cake, slightly lopsided but decorated with love and games. Richard came with his new partner, and Margaret felt none of the jealousy she'd expected. Instead, she felt grateful he'd found someone who made him happy. As Sophie blew out her candles, Margaret's phone buzzed. Her former board chair, final offer. "Come back as CEO. Name your terms. We need you." Margaret looked at her daughter's joy-filled face, at the friends cheering, at the life they'd built together in these quiet months. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, powerful, successful, and utterly hollow. She turned off her phone. "What did you wish for?" Richard asked Sophie as she finished her cake. Sophie looked directly at Margaret, her eyes shining. "I wished that Mommy would stay forever." Margaret's eyes burned with tears. "Wish granted, baby girl." 2 years later, Margaret sat at a different kind of conference table, this one in a community center, helping other working mothers navigate the impossible balance between career and family. She'd written a book about her experience, not as a success story, but as a cautionary tale. The tech world had moved on without her, and she'd discovered she didn't mind at all. Sophie, now 7, was thriving. She was confident, creative, and remarkably forgiving. She still had moments when old hurts surfaced. "Remember when you used to not come to my things?" But they talked through them together. "Do you miss it?" Richard asked her one afternoon, watching Sophie play soccer. "The power, the prestige, the empire." Margaret considered the question honestly. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remember that empire was built on a foundation of neglect. I was successful at everything except the one thing that mattered most." She watched Sophie score a goal, saw her daughter's face light up as she searched the sidelines for her mother. Their eyes met, and Sophie waved enthusiastically. Margaret waved back, her heart full in a way no board approval had ever made her feel. "I thought I could have it all," Margaret continued quietly. "But I was measuring all by the wrong metrics. I had power, money, influence, and I was completely bankrupt where it counted. And now?" Now, Margaret thought, she had a daughter who crawled into bed with her on stormy nights, who asked for her help with homework, who saved her best stories for their dinner conversations. She had time to notice the small miracles, the gap-toothed smile, the improvement in Sophie's reading, the way her daughter's hand fit perfectly in hers. "Now I have enough," Margaret said simply. On Sophie's 8th birthday, Margaret found her daughter looking at an old photograph, the Forbes cover from Margaret's previous life, all sharp suits and sharper ambition. "Is that really you, Mommy?" Sophie asked, studying the stranger in the picture. Margaret sat beside her, looking at the woman she used to be. That Margaret had believed success was measured in market share and profit margins. She'd thought love could be scheduled between meetings, that presence could be replaced with presence. "That's who I was," Margaret said. "Before I understood what actually mattered." Sophie leaned against her mother's shoulder. "I like this Mommy better." Margaret pulled her close, breathing in the moment. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." The photograph went back in the drawer, a relic of a life she'd outgrown. Outside, the afternoon sun painted their small house in gold, and Sophie's friends were arriving for another modest celebration. This was her empire now, built on bedtime stories and scraped knees, on being present for the ordinary moments that made up a life. It was smaller than her corporate kingdom, quieter than her former glory, but it was real. And it was more than enough.